Hello everybody, welcome to this new episode of Books Up Close. I hope you're doing well, keeping healthy and reading lots if you can. Apologies for missing a few weeks, but the start of term has been incredibly hectic, as I'm sure you can understand. So I've not had the most time on the weekends to put these together. But finally I am here with a review of Marilynne Robinson's latest novel, Jack. So Jack came out this year and is the fourth part of her series of books set in and around the kind of families of a town called Gilead in Iowa. The first book was called Gilead and that came out in 2004, and that was then followed by Home and then Lila, and now we've got Jack. And in each of the four books we revolve around two central families really, the Ameses and the Boughtons. So the first novel was written from the perspective of John Ames writing to his son. He's an old preacher and he's writing to his son because he knows that he's not going to be there for most of his sons growing up. So the novel is this long letter about his life, his family, his ancestors at one point, and really just a kind of depiction of life in this small Iowa town in the mid-20th century. Finally, we've got Jack, which is a story told in third person but very heavily focalized from Jack's perspective, and we finally find out more about his life, especially this part set in St. Louis. So where Jack kind of hovered on the edges of the other books, this kind of presence, he's the troublemaker of the family that causes kind of heartbreak for his father and also for John Ames by default. And while Jack's kind of misdeeds have always been off camera, so to speak, finally they come to the fore here, even though what we get is only a small little portion of his life in St. Louis once he moves there away from Iowa. So this book is obviously beautifully written. Marilynne Robinson can't write a dull sentence. She writes very quiet, soft, thoughtful sentences. The books, they're all kind of thick with theology, which is never really heavily done. It's always kind of done through the characters and their dialogues and conversations, but she's very much interested in ideas as well as characters. She's interested in trying out ideas through the way people interact with each other, rather than trying to deliver a particular moral or sermon in the books. And in this one, there are some stark differences from this and the other books. So firstly, it's written almost entirely in dialogue, which is a vast change from the other ones. There are obviously descriptive passages in between, but it's very dialogue heavy. And it's maybe the one weakness of the book is that not all the dialogue rings completely true. Jack and his girlfriend Della, who I'll talk about in a minute, they have long conversations and sometimes the dialogue gets a little bit forced, but it's a really interesting narrative strategy to really follow the voices of these characters rather than necessarily delving always into their consciousness, which is what we got a lot of in the other books, especially Home. So I'm really interested in why Robinson made that decision and what it helps her do narratively. So as I say, the story really just follows Jack and his girlfriend slash wife Della. I won't say too much more about that, but she's an African-American woman, he's a white man, and their relationship in the mid-20th century America is not one that people are happy with, especially not Della's father, who is also a bishop, let alone with Jack. He's not the most quote-unquote trustworthy of people, nor for that matter is he a religious person. He often talks about not believing in God, and Della is happy with that. They kind of fall for each other very quickly, and the moment that they do so really is this long scene at night in a graveyard when they both get locked in and find each other and spend all night walking around talking. It's a really intense, interesting scene. It's both really slow, really kind of luxuriates in the kind of awkward silences, in weird moments, in moments of tension whereby the guard almost finds them, and then the morning when they have to try and sneak out separately. So where in the previous Gilead books, one of the main critiques of Robinson has been her kind of treatment of race, because while the kind of spectre of abolition appears in Gilead and John Ames talks about his grandfather who was an abolitionist, it kind of happens in the past, right? It's all kind of like siphoned off to the past, whereas this Iowa town is strikingly white. And then the spectre of civil rights and Della herself appear in Home, but Della only appears at the very end, and civil rights comes up in little flashes of dialogue. There's not much of that in Lila, and critics have often said that Robinson is interested in the idea of race, but she doesn't tackle it head on. It's kind of always at the edges of the books, either consigned to the past all consigned to the extremities of the novel. So, for example, Della only pops up right at the end for a final scene. In Jack, she seems to, whether consciously or unconsciously, rectify that absence and puts Della right at the heart of the book with Jack. And lots of their conversations revolve around race and race relations. As I say, I don't think the book is perfect by any means. There are parts of it that I thought could have been left out. There are bits that could have been fleshed out. But Robinson is always a novelist who's interested in silences and gaps in the kind of unknown things. Jack will tell us that he has done awful things, but we don't always see them. They're not always at the foreground of the narrative, rather they come to us secondhand via him. He calls himself at one point, kind of half-jokingly, the Prince of Darkness, and it really makes us think what kinds of things he's done. He finally tells us how he ended up in prison, but even that is kind of done with these broad brushstrokes that we don't get all of a full sense of who he is. And maybe that's the point. Maybe not knowing Jack fully, who in Home was this prodigal son figure. And here he's the kind of exile, the one living on the edges of society, the one who's breaking taboos and norms. And maybe that's part of Robinson's strategy, to show us these characters who aren't always fully knowable. And I think that's a really interesting idea as a novelist. Yet these 4 books have shown that clearly there's something about this family that Robinson is not done with and she wants to keep telling us about. I was going to say this is a really interesting end to the kind of tetralogy, but who knows, she may write more books about these families and their lives. I don't think it's the strongest of the 4, but it is beautiful in its own ways. It's a fantastic read. Like, you'll read it very quickly. You feel really strongly for the characters, but I think that's one of the biggest weaknesses for me. I didn't feel as much for Jack and Della in this book. And I don't know why. I don't know if it was because Jack suddenly is the centre of the narrative rather than on the outside, and therefore something was lost in that process. But in Home, for example, in Gilead, there are real moments of heavy sadness that really strike you. And in this book, I didn't feel it as much. But nonetheless, it is a great read. You will like it, especially if you've read the other Gilead books. You could jump straight into this one if you've never read the other ones before and not lose anything, but I think you would gain far more if you read them in the sequence. And just for my money, Home is the best of the 4 books, I think. At least it's my favourite of the 4 books. Let me put it that way. Okay, so for that reason, I'm giving this book 4 out of 5. I was almost going to give it 3 out of 5, but actually I think the beauty of the prose and the interesting narrative structure is enough to kind of wrestle this up to a 4. As ever, please like, subscribe, ring the bell, share this, tell friends about it, comment underneath. Tell me what you think of this book, of the other Robinson books, or just tell me what you're reading at the moment. I really want to know. Until next time, take care of yourselves, look after each other, stay healthy, and I'll see you soon.